Hey, what's up you guys? I'm Caitlin from Leave Me Alone Plants, and today I'm going to be going through all the things that you should know if you're buying plants online and what to do with those plants once they arrive at your house. Now, a little background, I of course am a plant lover. I buy plants on the internet all the time and have to care for them once they do arrive to my house. But on a very small scale, I am also a plant seller. I have a ton of experience with shipping all types of plants, from cacti to succulents to foliage plants, and over the time I've learned a lot about how to help my customers take care of their plants when they arrive at their house. Now, I have a feeling that this video might get a little long because there is a lot to go over, but I will put time cards in the description down below as well as chapters in the slider bar, so if you have a specific plant or question that you're looking to get answered, you can skip to that time right ahead. Today we're going to be going over just some general shipping information, and we'll specifically talk about foliage plants, cacti, and succulents, and we will end with how to troubleshoot issues with your seller if they do arise. Now, I personally collect and sell more common plants, and that's what this video is really going to specify around, but if you are looking for information on aroids or rarer plants or variegated plants, I highly recommend first check out this video because, I mean, you're already here. But I will drop Kaylee Ellen's video down in the description. She's the owner of the Rare Plant Shop, and her video is really great information on how to handle post-shipment care for those types of plants. So with that said, grab a drink, cozy on up, and let's get into it. So in the future, I plan on doing a full video on what to look for ahead of time when you're looking for plants to buy online, but just a couple quick things to note before we get into the video. There's basically going to be two ways that you can have plants shipped to you. Either they're going to ship in their pots with soil, or they can ship bare root. Now, I have a lot more experience and I more often tend to ship bare root, so that's what most of these methods today are going to go over. However, some quick things to note if you are getting plants shipped to you in a pot with a soil substrate. When the plant arrives and it is in its pot and you pull it out, the first thing that you're going to want to do, of course, after checking out the foliage to see your beautiful new plant, is take a look at the soil and examine what the state of that soil is. Is the soil super wet? If that is the case, you are going to want to go and take that pot and put it somewhere that is maybe a little warmer so that water can evaporate out of that pot faster and hopefully not result in root rot. It's not uncommon for sellers to give the plant a heavy watering or just a little extra water before you ship it out the door, just as an insurance policy basically, because no matter how good of a seller you are, once that plant gets sent to the post office or wherever you're shipping it out of, you really lose control and it can end up getting stuck in postage for a long time. So by adding a little extra water, you kind of give yourself a wiggle room. But with that said, if you're noticing the soil medium is really soaked, please do not go in and add more water. Let that soil dry out so that you can avoid any root rot issues. Now, conversely, if you get that plant and it is just bone dry, it is crunchy, and your plant's looking a little on the thirsty side, then absolutely you are going to want to go in with water in that scenario. And also, with that said, just because it's dry doesn't necessarily mean that your seller did not try and prevent that. I do find that it is very common for moisture to seem to dry up really fast when plants are shipping. I'm not really sure what it is, but the water seems to evaporate extra quick. In this scenario, if it's in a pot with holes in the bottom watering can be a really great option, just so you're sure not to, again, go in and overwater it and stress out a plant that has already gone through so much stress with shipping. Letting it absorb the water on its own time and kind of get as much as it needs before you take it out of that bowl can be a really great way to remedy that dry soil. Finally, if you have that Goldilocks soil, it is just in the middle, it is just right, please do not do anything to it. If your plant arrives and it looks happy and things seem to be going well, please do not add anything to the pot. Furthermore, if your plant arrives in a pot, I highly recommend not taking it out of the pot. Again, you're gonna hear me say this so many times throughout the course of this video, but your plant is already in a stress state, and by depotting it and knocking the soil off the roots and putting it somewhere new, it's going to stress your plant out even more for an unnecessary reason. Now, if it comes in one of those little nursery pots and you can just not stand the way that it looks, I always recommend putting that nursery pot just inside a cover pot for the time being, and once it gets a little more acclimated, then you can go ahead and you can pot it up in a different pot in the future. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave off on potted plants. Now, again, just something to be cognizant of before you even purchase your plant. Be sure to read the entire item description. Not super often, but my items do mention that they ship bare root, and every now and then somebody hasn't read that and they're surprised when the plant arrives without a pot. I know other people that I know who sell mention, you know, they're selling maybe cuttings and the person thought they were getting a full plant. So just for your sake and the seller's sake, please be sure to read the full description and know what you are getting yourself into. Okay, so fast forward a week, the item shipped and it has arrived at your door. What do you do now? Well, the very first thing I recommend is keep an eye on your tracking. If you know that you have a plant arriving today and you also know that you're going to be working until 5 o'clock and then you're going to get a drink with the girls after and then you're going to a yoga class and you have a hot date, try and see if maybe you can either stop home to pick that plant up and unbox it, get it out of the elements, or have one of your neighbors grab it. I know the first example I always think of is plants sitting out in the cold not being good for them, but conversely, if your plant's sitting on your patio and baking in the sun, it's going to get super hot in the box and it's not going to be great either. So first thing, just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that tracking, know when the box is going to arrive, and try and snatch that guy off your porch as fast as you possibly can. Now, this next thing might seem obvious, but I feel like it's worth saying, which is please be careful and delicate when you are unboxing. I know I personally like to box up my plants very snugly in the box, and I do not leave a lot of empty room. This not only helps sellers cut down on shipping prices, but it also ensures that your plant isn't going to be bouncing around in the box and kind of adds an extra layer of security. Now, typically you will have some kind of filler in there as well, but my plants typically end up very close to the edge of the box, so do not go in with your knife and start just stabbing around at random. Oh my god, my plants are here! You may end up with a fatality if that's how you're unboxing your plants. Just don't do it. Okay, so the plant's out of the box, we're unwrapping it very carefully. We haven't had any casualties yet. Let's say when you unbox it, you notice that the plant isn't looking that great. The very first thing that I recommend you do at this point is stop, do not fast go, do not collect $200, do not repot it first. Take a picture of the plant, take a picture of the box if the box is beaten up, and just document what this plant looks like and send it to your seller as soon as possible. I know so many people have the best intentions that they want to, you know, get their plant potted up super fast, or they get sidetracked and they do other things and it's a couple days later before they remember to take a picture. But as a seller, if you come to me with pictures a week after your plant arrived and say that it doesn't look good, it's really hard for me to know what went wrong in the process. Conversely, if you send them to me right away, I obviously will know that something probably went wrong in shipping, perhaps something went wrong on my end, and we can be sure to get the situation figured out for you. Now, conversely, even if your plant looks great, it's always really nice from a seller to get somebody who sends a plant and says that it looks good. It's always highly appreciated if you're feeling up to it, but more importantly, if something is not looking right, document it as quickly as possible. Now, at this point, I think it's worth noting the fact that even with the greatest of care, even with the greatest of packing, chances are your plant is going to have some kind of signs of stress. It's probably not going to look super pristine, and that is okay. Your plant is going to rebound with care. It's just a little shaken up from its travels. Now, I know a lot of times in my seller groups, people like to use the analogy, well, if you just shipped in a box, you would look that way too. And I think that's kind of a dumb analogy because, let's be honest, we're not shipping people in boxes. At least I sure hope not. But the analogy that I like to use is think about how you feel and look when you get off an airplane. I constantly take flights between where I live in Phoenix and back to my hometown in Buffalo, New York. And I can tell you, by the time that I get off that flight and land in Buffalo, I am not looking too cute. That is really similar to what happens to your plants. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're dying, it doesn't mean that they're sick, it's just they've had a long journey and they're looking a little rougher than they normally do. It's okay, we're going to get into right now how to make sure that your plants bounce back from this state. So at this point, I'm going to kind of hit a fork in the road, and we are going to start talking specifically about succulents and cacti. But if your plant is a foliage plant, then feel free to fast forward to the chapter listed down below. So the great news is, if you're planning on buying or have already bought a cacti or succulent to get shipped to you, I generally find that these tend to do really well in the mail. They almost always arrive with no signs of stress. And even when I've had cacti and succulent get lost in the mail, they tend to actually show up just fine. Time online plant buyer, this is a really good place to start and kind of build up your confidence with what works and what doesn't work. Now again, I'm going to say this phrase a lot throughout the video. One thing that seems kind of obvious but might not be if you're a new plant parent, or maybe you've just never seen a plant shipped bare root out of its pot, is that very commonly where that cactus was below the soil line is going to be a different color than what it looks like above the soil line. This can be anything from a brownish color to a yellowish color. It really depends on the specific variety, but typically it is going to be a different shade than what is below the soil. Now, I don't want you to freak out if you see this. This is completely normal and does not mean that your cactus is unhealthy. It is simply just where that plant was exposed to things like moisture or fertilizer and other things that potentially discolored it. Now, with that said, if you notice that this discoloration seems to be creeping far up your plant, or perhaps the area that is discolored is squishy or mushy, or there's weird smells coming from it, that is a point that you might want to say to yourself, something is not right here, and reach out to the seller as soon as possible. And again, if you're not sure, that's totally okay too. Always feel free to reach out to your seller. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you and help you understand what is normal and not normal with your plants. So don't hesitate to send along some pictures just in case. Now that brings us into watering cacti and succulents. I'm going to have some different advice for what to do with foliage plants when they first arrive, but if you have cacti or succulents that are arriving and they're looking normal, they're not wrinkly, they don't look like they're super in need of water, I recommend potting them up, giving them a drink, but don't go crazy with it. One of the biggest reasons I think cacti and succulent end up dying is because of root rot. So just because it hasn't gotten a drink in a couple of days does not mean that you need to go wild. That is a totally acceptable time for plants to go without water, especially if they are cacti and succulent. So go ahead, pot it up, give it a little drink, give it some sun, and you should be in business at this point. Another thing that can happen specifically with cacti, and I probably should have said this at the beginning of the segment, but please, if you know that you have a cactus in the box, just be careful when you're handling it. I know in my shop, I try and message people ahead of time and put stickers on there that indicate that it is a cactus so they can be careful, but just proceed with caution if you know that you ordered a cactus in the mail, because it is very easy to get stuck with them. I had somebody ask the other day if it is dangerous if you get stuck with a cactus, and while it of course is going to vary by plant, typically I would say no, it's not necessarily dangerous, it's more so just uncomfortable. I get unfortunately stabbed by cacti all the time, and really you just pull the needles out and you're fine, you move on with your life. You may experience a little bit of swelling, but it should not transition into some kind of medical emergency. Now with that said, what can really happen with those spines in there is if there's loose dirt that was packaged with the plant, or maybe if they have kind of a looser packing material like polyfill, or I know some people use like the little shipping beads, they can get stuck in between the spines of your cactus, and it's like super annoying to pick them out because you're gonna get stabbed if you do that. What I recommend doing is grabbing an old toothbrush and just running it up and down the side of your cactus to get all that nastiness out of there. It takes it out super easy. That is my favorite way to do it. I have a designated toothbrush just for my cacti, so if you run into that problem and your cactus is full of gunk, then trust me, just grab a toothbrush. It will save your day. Now, one final tip of advice that I have for cacti and succulents is very often these plants are plants that can handle either a full sun or bright direct light. My word of caution typically is just, if you are going to do that, kind of ease your plant into it. I know on this channel I always talk about how here in Arizona we have such an intense strong sun and a lot of plants can't handle it. The thing is you don't always know what the conditions the plant you bought were stored in before. And if it isn't used to getting a super intense sunlight, then if you put it in those conditions right away, it might freak out, it might get sunburned, it might get a callus on it. So I recommend kind of easing it into the light slowly and not going hog wild right away, because bad things can happen when you do that. Okay, so transitioning into foliage plants. You have plants that are not cacti, not succulents, they're leafy, they're probably not going to be quite as hardy as those cactus and succulent are for shipping. With that said, again, totally feasible to ship these plants. It happens all the time. I know when I tell people who aren't into houseplants that I ship plants, they're always like mystified by the fact that they survive in the mail, but they absolutely do. It's absolutely feasible. So here is what you're going to want to do when these plants arrive. The first thing you're going to want to assess when you get the plant out is, what do the leaves look like? Of course we want our plants to be, you know, super full and bouncy when they arrive. However, with that said, if your plant's looking a little on the droopy side, Don't freak out right away. Again, this is completely normal to happen during shipping. They can look a little sad. As soon as they get some water, believe me, 9 times out of 10, they are going to bounce back. Now, conversely, if you have leaves on this plant that are yellow or kind of mushy, that's not the greatest sign. Those leaves specifically are not going to make it, and my preference for that is typically to prune those leaves off. Now again, if this is your scenario, before you go pruning up the plant, take a picture for your seller to send along, let them know it happened. But with that said, while it is a little unfortunate, it isn't unheard of that a leaf or two can turn yellow during shipping. It just happens sometimes. A final scenario to go through is if the foliage arrives and the leaves are crispy. Yikes, that is not good. I would take pictures immediately and send them over to your seller because it sounds like something went wrong during the shipping process. Most commonly, I find this happens when plants get stuck in the mail and there's delays, or perhaps there just wasn't enough water given to the plant before it got shipped out. It does happen. Please reach out to your seller so they can make things right for you. So if your plant falls into the first 3 categories, it was ship bare root and it's either, perky and happy looking, it's a little droopy, or it's, mostly okay but has some yellowing of leaves. In all 3 of these scenarios, I recommend unwrapping the roots, checking them, make sure they look healthy. If there's any dead roots or weirdness going on in there, feel free, again, take a picture if you need to, but feel free to go in and prune up those roots. I know it seems a little stressful to do this, but I think one of the weird things that we do with plants is we're really comfortable like pruning off the top and the leaves if something goes wrong, but we get really nervous to prune up the roots, and that shouldn't be the case. Even on your plants that haven't shipped, if you notice dead roots or root rot, please go in and trim those up. Trust me, it will help the overall health of the plant. So at this point, roots are looking good. We have the plant, it's sitting in our hand. I want you to either get a cup or some kind of pot, fill it up with water, just water. Please do not put fertilizer in this water, and try and make it as room temperature as possible, not scalding hot, not ice cold, just nice, regular room temperature water, and place your plant in there for 24 hours. This is going to let the plant soak up all the water that it needs and get itself revitalized before you plant it up in soil. So at this point, it's the next day, your plant's soaked up that water, it's looking a lot better, hopefully, and at this point you're going to want to go in, get a pot, and pot your plant up. Now, if you have questions about what kind of soil medium to use, what size pot would be best, again, don't hesitate to reach out to your seller. If that's me, hi, how are you? Your seller should be responsive to helping you with these things. If they're a little on the bigger side, they might not have time to, but in that case, if you're really not sure, go to the internet, Google your plant. There's always going to be information out there on what the best thing to do for you is. Once you get your plant potted up, I personally like to go in with just a little more dash of water so that soil is not bone dry, but do note that it has just been sitting in water for 24 hours, so you're not going to want to go nuts. Same thing that I had mentioned about cacti and succulents. You're picking a spot lighting-wise for where to put this plant. Even if it's a plant that says that it likes bright, direct light, I tend to slowly transition that plant from a darker space to a brighter space over a couple day period. Again, not only has it been sitting in a pitch black box for a couple of days, it needs to acclimate. Also consider the fact that your seller may not have had that plant in as intensive light as you plan on putting it in. So giving that plant a transition period will really make sure that nothing crazy happens, it doesn't get burnt, and crisp up on you. Additionally, something I hadn't mentioned is if you have a plant and you know that this is a plant that likes a lot of humidity, when it arrives, either placing it next to a humidifier, or you can even take I'm from New York, I refer to them as like Wegmans bags, but like the plastic bags that you get at the grocery store, wrap that around the top of your plant to create a humidity dome. You can even use like Ziploc bags if your plant is small enough, just to kind of lock in the moisture around that plant. It will really help it kind of get its bearings back a lot faster than if it's just sitting out and doesn't have that good of humidity. Finally, if this plant is a plant that has flowers, I think something really important to note that I always try and put in my listings, but is good to know for any plant if you're buying them with flowers, is that unfortunately flowers typically do not make it through shipping. This is going to be more so a topic in the video buying plants, but I think it's important to note here that oftentimes you'll see sellers kind of bump up the prices for plants because they have these beautiful flowers on them without mentioning the fact that likely by the time this plant arrives to you, those flowers are going to be dead. This is unfortunately just a fact of nature. Typically, no plant's flowers tend to last super long, and even if the bloom cycle is still in motion and it's still going to put out new flowers, typically you will have to prune back those flowers. And even going off of that, if you have dead leaves on your plant, this comes down to preference. I always suggest for people to prune back anything that's dead on the plant to avoid opening up a situation where you're going to have root rot and to avoid having the plant put energy into something that is just going to die in the end anyway. So that's where I'm going to leave it off for care when they arrive. But if you have specific questions that I did not answer about either of those, please drop them down below. The final thing that I wanted to talk about today was how to approach your seller if there is a problem. I have had this happen to me myself, and I know it can be so frustrating when you buy a plant online and you're so excited and it finally arrives and then it's just not great. It's either dead or it doesn't look anything like you expected. Here's the thing. 9 times out of 10 as sellers, we want you to be happy. We want you to get the plant that you want. Believe me when I say it, this is not what your seller's thinking. All the plants inside are dead and nobody can compete with me on plant videos now. Okay, maybe there's like one person out there who's thinking that. It's certainly not me. Again, just note that your seller wants you to be happy just as much as you want to be happy with the plant. Now, in the unfortunate scenario where there is an issue and you're going to reach out to the seller, again, this might sound obvious, but if you can try and avoid doing things like writing in all caps, or swearing at your seller, or accusing them of being a scammer, and instead talk to them in a way that is kind and just simply wants a resolution, believe me, they are going to be far more likely to come from a place of kindness and want to fix this issue for you than if they're getting some crazy message that looks something like this. Now again, any good seller is going to help you no matter what you reach out to them with, but I think the golden rule really applies here. Treat others the way that you want to be treated and good things will come from that. With that said, if you are in an unfortunate scenario where you either did get scammed or your seller is really unresponsive, I'd say a good amount of time to wait before escalating the issue is probably 48 hours. I know that might seem long, but at the end of the day, many of us plant sellers, especially on Etsy, are just normal people. We still have day jobs, we still have lives that unfortunately sometimes get in the way. So even when the best intentioned seller may typically respond in 5 minutes, things do happen. So before you take any crazy action, try and just give them the benefit of the doubt and wait it out. Finally, if need be, if you bought your plant through PayPal or services like Etsy or other marketplaces, typically you will have buyer protection. You can take up a claim with them. Otherwise, of course, there is always the option to do a chargeback. If you ran into an issue with somebody who did not have good intentions, don't feel hopeless. Believe me, there are ways to resolve the issue. Finally, one last point I think is worth noting is that say you get a plant, it really was not in a great condition, and your seller ends up sending you a replacement. If you feel up to it, I highly recommend not disposing of the plant right away. What I find very common is if you chop the plant back completely, if you continue to give that plant light and water, it will actually regrow back. So fun fact, do not give up on your plants early. Many times in those scenarios, you can get them to come back and then you just have 2 awesome plants. So who doesn't love that? I hope this video was helpful. I hope it answered some of your questions and concerns about what to do when your plants arrive online, but if it didn't and you have other questions that you were hoping were going to be answered in this video, please drop them in the comment section down below and I will do my very best to get back to you in a timely manner. If you learned something new today, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you are new to this channel, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button for all sorts of plant related videos. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.